Another year appears to be speeding by. How do you focus on what you are going to work on next?
Well, that was a question that was probably more difficult to answer, I don't know, like 20 years ago or something. These days I always have the problem that what I'm actually doing or what I have to do is not so much determined by sort of like a situation of complete control and freedom, but it's usually I'm always running behind my own schedule a bit. So that is kind of the situation now as well, because like the working and preparing that box set took so much longer than I had initially anticipated, that there's like a whole bunch of projects that I had to delay, and I'm trying to catch up with that at the moment. And the ultimate goal is to be in a situation where at some point in the next couple of months I'll be sort of at point zero, and then I wanted to work on some new solo music, basically. You know?
So how do you consider yourself as a solo musician, a musician in a group, and a private individual? How do you manage to split yourself and give yourself proper headspace?
As far as the latter is concerned, private individual, probably not at all. And I think I never have, because I think that the whole music thing always, I mean, you could word it negatively or positively. I mean, you could either say it's been swallowing up my private life for, I don't know, the last 20, 25 years, or you could say that music was always like a very significant part of my personality, or whatever. And dividing time between different projects, I never found that difficult. More the other way around, actually. I think if I'm working on one thing too much for a too long time, then I'm almost like thirsty for like different input and for the opportunity to do different things. So I always find that very, very nurturing and inspiring, actually, to have the opportunity to work on different things at the same time.
And Torsten and Chico have thriving solo projects too. Do you think it's a great dynamic, all of you doing your own thing, then reforming to work on a Tangerine Dream project? Obviously from your perspective.
Like, I think what I said just about myself, that probably applies to them just as much, although I don't think we've actually ever talked about this, but I would imagine that, especially because, I mean, it's not like any of us is like super restricted within Tangerine Dream, but at the same time there is obviously a framework there, and a framework that obviously is not like one-to-one of your respective own framework, no? And therefore there are areas which are uncovered by what is possible within the Tangerine Dream universe, and that makes it necessary, I'd almost say, for everyone to have like different spaces where they can do different things. I think it's pretty much always been like that. I mean, even Edgar did so many solo records, no? Where you could actually think, well, in a classic sort of rock band situation where you have a band leader, surely you would imagine that he... I think normally you would imagine that such a person has complete freedom to realize any and every idea they have within the context of that band. But yeah, but it seems like even Edgar sort of felt a need to take one or the other project into like a different context.
Yeah, because I suppose Christopher Frank and Johan Schmoling, etc., they seem to have their solo careers afterwards.
For instance, yeah. But I think that's a different. I would imagine. I mean, again, I don't know this. I'm just speculating. But I would imagine that that's probably for different reasons as well. Because obviously they were both part of the band at a point when things were so busy, you know, like with all the soundtracks and stuff, that maybe under such circumstances it's more or less impossible even to take on too many other things. I mean, Franke did a lot of other stuff as well. You know? Like he produced stuff for other people, mixed other people's records and things like that. So yeah, but again, like I think if you have to do like 3 or 4 or 5 soundtracks per year as part of the band as well, then that is probably enough, I would imagine.
The Tangerine Dream tours are increasing. What's it like touring and visiting the different locations?
It varies, really. You know, I don't really see such a big difference to other constellations where I've played gigs, like whether it's on my own or with other projects. You know, like often the cliched thing to say, but that's actually true, is often you feel like it's a shame I can't actually get a bit of a better grasp on that particular town or whatever. You hardly see much more than the airport, the venue and the hotel. Sometimes you actually do have a bit more time, and it's really nice, and yeah, but it really varies, you know, like sometimes, like for totally subjective reasons, you have positive experiences in one place and negative ones in another, and I always think like, well, if I would have gone to that place just for a holiday or something like that, my impression probably would have been completely different. So yeah, I think it's very hard to generalize that, but I think generally just like the conception that people have about touring is probably a bit nicer than it is. I mean, I'm not complaining or anything, but it's just not like you're traveling to all these amazing cities and you get loads of time to explore the places. Like usually there's not much more than maybe like a 3 or 4 hour time window between gig and soundcheck, and that's it really.
Now you have the ability to see what you have achieved looking back. How does that make you feel?
I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I'm imagining you're asking this probably a bit like on the backdrop of that box set thing.
Oh no! Also on the back end of when we spoke a couple of years ago, when we were talking about you growing up, listening to music. So kind of on the basis of
yeah. But the thing is,
would you have projected yourself, seeing yourself in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the only thing that actually made a difference as far as that perspective is concerned is the box set, though, ironically, and for the simple reason that without working on a project like that, I don't think I actually would have given it that much thought, because for me it doesn't feel that different, and the box set actually made me realize that it's almost 25 years now I'm releasing music, and that is from my point of view, that's a shockingly long time, you know, and I had no actual like conscious awareness of the fact that it is such a long that it is such a long time already. And the funny thing is also, but I think that's really nothing that's necessarily specific to musicians. It's probably something that's specific to human beings at best, and that is like you make various different kinds of plans at certain points in your life, and then you also have an idea how you may feel like, and maybe you think like, if I reach point XYZ, then I will be a lot happier than I am, or whatever. And then the funny thing is, because like I just explained, like the perception of time is and the perception of getting there from, let's say, from point A to point C or whatever, it dilutes the actual realization that you have actually reached that specific point C or whatever so much that you barely notice it actually. So for me, I still have sort of like the same basic overall feeling that I had when I was like 16 or whatever. But I obviously, just because it's an undeniable fact, I do have to acknowledge somehow that a lot of things happened in between. But I can't say that necessarily made me feel super proud or anything like that.
You've spoken before about it's almost being a vessel to the music. I mean, you still feel in some way it is just you. It's just part of you, and you're just And I certainly don't feel like I've reached a point, or I'm just close to reaching a point where I could say like I've fulfilled my musical ambitions. But in a way, I always think that's actually a good thing, because the problem obviously really is if I would have reached that point, or if I could foresee that I'm going to reach that next year or whatever, then it would result in asking myself the big question: well, what am I going to do after that? So maybe it's a good thing that in music it's very hard to actually fulfill your ambitions, and it's kind of like an ongoing and probably infinite journey anyway. I really must thank you for stepping in last minute at the Hope and Anchor in July. It occurred to me that it must be extraordinary to perform in small and large venues as a recognised artist. But to you, playing and performing to any size audience, how does the contrast feel?
I hope I'm not disappointing you too much with these answers, because I feel like I'm constantly sort of like playing things down. But to be honest with you, for me, the difference is not that big at all. I would say like it's a different kind of pressure. So when you are performing in a very large venue, the pressure is more abstract, because there is probably, like, let's say, like a booking agency of a certain status involved. There is probably going to be reviews in the press. It creates like a certain pressure as well in terms of like selling enough tickets to justify the financial input that other people who are involved have contributed. And in very small places, the pressure is simply a lot more direct, in the way that if you do turn your head to the audience, and you can obviously literally see people's faces and their reaction, and obviously no one would feel comfortable in a situation where that reaction that you can see is, for instance, a very negative or a very bored or whatever one. No? So it's like it is two very different situations, but at the same time, for me, as soon as I've sort of managed to get a bit into the process of making music, it's probably it's not probably not very present in my experience anyway. I don't think I play differently depending on whether it's like a larger or a smaller audience at all, really. No. So can't even say that I think that the results are necessarily better or worse. Like, I mean, it's because these things are, at least if you're doing stuff that has like a bit of an improvisatory sort of mood and feeling related aspect to it, then it much more depends on how you're feeling on that very day, and that's something that you can't really change with discipline, for instance, that much anyway. If it's a bad day and you're not inspired, then that could be 10,000 or 10 people, but you're just not going to play a very good show. And same way the other way around.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I do think they're interesting answers. I also suspect now that you have possibly played many different session tracks at gigs and venues that haven't been recorded. I wouldn't say they would be throwaway tracks, but if they were not recorded, how do you feel with those pieces of music only existing in that moment?
Again, I mean, because I've done so much stuff that has not been recorded in all these years, that's not something that I'd be too bothered about. But actually, in the case of TD, that's not even true. I think we've been very disciplined recording as much as possible, and I think that's really only a handful of things that we haven't recorded. We've even recorded pretty much all rehearsals, and so might be actually only like 4 or 5 sessions that we have not recorded.
But has it been like something you've ended up performing as yourself, and then just thinking about what you've been doing while you've been doing it, and then you thought afterwards, what a shame I didn't record that somehow. It just turned out to be something totally different to what you even expected at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, on my own, that doesn't happen to me that often, because I do my solo stuff very differently to that. I very rarely do anything on my own that's based on improvisation. I always sort of write stuff out, usually starting on the piano, and I don't really lose that many, at least important ideas anymore as well, because nowadays it's so easy, to quickly switch on your mobile phone and record something. I've recorded, for instance, when I was on tour with in the UK, actually with Nat, who's doing my visits, at one of the venues, can't even remember, it might have been Hepton Bridge or something. There was a piano, and I was just because we had a couple of hours to kill, I was just playing a bit, and then had an idea that I really liked, and I just asked her to record the theme I was sort of developing at that point. And that, for instance, that would have been an idea. I think I would have been quite sad if I would have lost that, because I'm really looking forward to properly arranging that as well. That's probably gonna be one of the first thing I do for my next release. But that's the thing. Basically, I really don't lose stuff that often anymore these days. And even 20 years ago, I sometimes did things like calling my own answering machine and quickly singing a melody on the tape that was in there. So there's ways.
I was going to say, is that one thing? Because I know I do it. I know I think I wouldn't want to lose anything. So even bits and pieces, outtakes, bits I didn't even know if it was going to work out or not. It's just part of it. But I don't know if that's a collector thing. And then there was the other aspect where I was believing maybe even yourself, if you would have done that. But no, I think you've answered that well. It looks like you're in the same boat, really. You don't really want to get rid of anything if you can help it.
Yeah, I mean, especially if at least in that very moment you think this is actually a very good idea, then of course you don't want to lose it. And whether it actually lives up to that later on when you revisit it, that's an entirely different question. But I think again, I don't record or write down or save anything and everything anymore. I think by now I've developed a reasonably okay way of sort of in the moment deciding, is this good enough that it's worth preserving it somehow or not. So because that's something I don't like as well, like ending up when you want to start working on an album or something and you end up with like a massive sketchbook of like thousands of ideas, and then you have the first thing you have to do is just like wade through an endless amount of sketches, and sometimes you make some wrong decisions, you know, and then you think like, why did I choose that one? Should have done that one instead. So I think it's quite important sort of to not overdo it as well.
Oh, a storage space as well. Storage space.
Yeah. Yeah.
But backing up your storage.
Yeah. At least hard drives have become really cheap in our times. So that's a good thing.
Also, coming back to venues, how did it feel playing in what appears like a secret amphitheatre in Dalston? It was called Earth, and who'd have thought such a large venue behind such small street doors?
Yeah, the funny thing is, I used to go to that place a couple of years ago quite regularly when friends of mine lived in that area, and not that big room was open, but one of the other, still quite a large room as well, and there was like pool tables, so that was like a place where you could go even like, let's say, at 2 a.m. or something and play a bit and hang out basically. And I had no idea that in all these years there was obviously this amazing venue there, but which had been abandoned, I guess. I'm not really sure what the status of that building was, but I think it's a very nice place, and it's obviously it's a good thing that they've sort of reopened it now and you are using it for its original purpose, I guess. So,
are you likely to go back there at all, you think?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. That's a nice space. Yeah. I actually wanted to go and see some other shows there as well, because I think they have quite good programming.
I'd also like to know what hours you keep when working on projects. Are you the kind of person who works relentless until it is complete?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say that, because I mean, to actually complete something takes too much time, as that I could do that without sleeping and eating.
Oh, I didn't mean like non-stop though, but yeah. I mean like if it would it be relentlessly day after day, you know, would you set out 8 hours a day? Would you work late into the night or get up early in the morning?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't really. My life is probably shockingly boring from some people's perspective. I hardly do anything besides making music, reading, and when I'm too tired for those two things, I don't know. I watch some stuff on YouTube or some movies or whatever. But most of the time, I am literally sitting in the studio pretty much 7 days a week anyway. And as far as my scheduling is concerned, my main problem is always that for some reason I've never quite managed to adjust to this sort of 24-hour thing. So it's usually like I to sort of stick to a recurring, consistent rhythm. I'm usually not tired enough to go to sleep early enough so that I could wake up again the next day the same time, and so quite often I'm sort of drifting in and out a bit. So like literally sometimes like week one I'm getting up at, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 or something like that in the morning, and then it sort of drifts and drifts to a point where 2 weeks later I will actually be getting up at 7 or 8 in the evening, you know, and then it sort of drifts back. So yeah, but I consider that a great luxury as well, you know, because obviously that's something that would not be possible if I had like a 9 to 5 kind of commitment. So I think that's one of the really nice things about doing music, for instance, that you are sort of master of your time to a degree where you can do such weird things. Yeah.
Well, it's this concept of time. It's to me, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, so music, music resonates to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also related to time in a theory. I mean, you spoke earlier about if you're working in a different sort of profession, but music always touches people, and touches can be 10, 100, 1,000 million.
Yeah.
And so that reach and what it does to people is very significant sometimes. But it's really interesting, this concept of time as well.
Yeah.
Because it does, from your answers, it's giving me this indication that time and music are much more related to what I thought of before sitting here and asking this particular question.
Yeah, probably depends a bit on what your preferred working method is. I mean, as much as I enjoy doing improvisatory stuff, for instance, I think what satisfies me the most is a piece that is sort of very much thought through and composed in the sense that it creates a structure or represents a structure over time. And obviously, something like an arrangement or a composition, that whole idea is not really thinkable without considering the factor time. That is like vitally essential to that. Yeah.
And when you make a decision to buy new equipment or software, what gives you an indication that you need to get that item?
Well, usually I look at the specs of an instrument, like certain technical details, and then if they are, in theory, it seems to provide interesting possibilities, then I check whether it actually delivers in reality, if that is possible. And if not, I've also bought stuff purely based on looking at the technical details, and then sometimes it's a disappointment because it sounds good on paper, but in reality there's something about the instrument that you just don't like sonically or whatever. Sometimes it's the other way around as well, though. Like sometimes you visit someone who has an instrument that just looking at the plain technical details you thought is completely uninteresting, but then you actually see that person doing something with it, or you try it yourself and you realize, I wouldn't have thought that. That's actually a lot more than what it seems to promise on the surface. A lot more interesting than that.
I mean, like with software, as an example. I mean, the realms of what can be produced and created today. Mm-hmm. I mean, well, it's just endless, isn't it? To an extent. Mm-hmm. So what makes you think about where you feel maybe sometimes you're lacking in something, or there's just something you want to put into your music? Is it related to something that you think no one's heard before, so you want to put that into it somehow? Or is it just, I mean, do you sometimes feel there's a sound you want to achieve?
Yeah, definitely there is. But I think we're not living in an age or in an era at the moment, sadly, I would say, actually, where it's as much about creating something that's never been heard before than it was at different times. Precisely because of what you just described. There were long times in electronic music where the technology was not very advanced, and therefore it was possible for human beings not only to perceive like the entire full range of possibilities, but to even develop desires that go beyond these possibilities, and to sort of come up with little tricks and quirks how to sort of bypass the limitations of the technology, and that's obviously where it gets really interesting, and where then innovation happens. And again, as you correctly described, at the moment we are living in a time where technology is actually maybe not light years, but big steps ahead of our imagination. And I don't think there is a single person on the planet at the moment that could realistically claim that their imagination exceeds the limitations of the technology. You know? And I think that's why I think the character of electronic music I think has changed very much as well. It's a little bit like it's the same process that rock music went through as well. You know, like there were like 50s and 60s, like an era of wild innovation and pushing things to the limit. And then at a certain point, there is it's like a paradigm shift more towards this approach of in a confident and solidified way, making use of what's already been invented. And I think that's the situation that we're in with electronic music now as well. I mean, to take an example from rock music, for instance, like no one is gonna expect like a new Neil Young or Springsteen album to reinvent rock music. But nevertheless, there are these people who do it with a degree of skill. I don't know whether that word exists in English. In German, we would say sovereignty or something like that. Does something like that? It means like when you're fully in control of the situation, you know, and you really mastered a craft, you know? So and that's why I think for instance, I very much like the latest Springsteen album, for instance. I think that's probably his best record in many years, and that's one of those examples. I mean, it doesn't reinvent or invent anything at all, but there is probably only a handful of people who can have the skills to record a classic rock album on that level, no? And I think up until maybe like the late 90s in electronic music, it was this sort of like still this sort of era of being confronted with a rather limited technology and trying to sort of push its boundaries. But I think in the last 20 years it's shifted towards a situation where it's not so much about that, but more about looking back at that history of the 30 whatever years before and sort of learning your lessons from that and applying and sort of like fine-tuning these techniques, no? And I guess both has their advantages and disadvantages. I mean, I'm not denying that, of course, if I had the choice, I'd love to live in an era where it's about like, you know, like breaking boundaries and reinventing. But yeah, I mean, I just simply have to say I don't have an idea how something today would sound that no one's ever heard before, and I don't think anybody else probably has. I don't know.
We've spoken about the box set. How did that particular project come about? When is it due for release?
Yeah, how it came about is one of those things that happen quite often that, from my point of view, obviously nice things are the results of little unexpected accidents, because usually when you sign a record deal and give away your rights for X amount of time, and in that contract there is like an option for the company to extend that rights period, it usually doesn't happen that they forget about it. But that's precisely what happened in this case. So, I mean, I wasn't expecting to get these rights back anytime too soon. But in winter last year, I got a call from my manager, and he had waited sort of like 24 hours until the deadline for the record label had passed to extend the rights period. And the next day he had given them a call and asked them, and yeah, apparently they just said something. Yeah, shit. Congratulations. And then he had the idea of doing not only reissues, but yeah, like a retrospective box set. And yeah, what happened then is essentially just that I went into my archive to dig out the in case of like the first couple of albums, like the original dub tapes, and make like new transfers, because I wanted to ensure that for the mastering the best possible quality sources can be used, and obviously discovered like a lot of stuff I had forgotten about as well. So some of that stuff is also gonna be on that release. There's like a whole disc of previously unreleased stuff, and in the case of 2 records, the last 2 albums, I wanted to take this opportunity to remix them, because specifically the album A Long Way to Fall I recorded and mixed at a time when I had some quite severe health problems, which also affected my hearing, and in hindsight I always thought that album didn't by far sound the way it should have sounded. What happened then is basically just one thing that happens to me quite often, that I underestimate like the scope of a project in terms of how much work it'll require to actually do it. And such was the case with that album. It's called A Long Way to Fall. So what I did is I basically dug out all the original raw recordings of all the elements and kind of like remixed it from scratch. And that took a lot longer than I had calculated at first. And then the thing was also, I was doing a lot better at the time when I recorded the album that came out after that. But I still thought, when I was then listening to the reworked A Long Way to Fall, actually that album afterwards would probably benefit from a bit of similar treatment as well. And that again caused like another massive delay, you know? And I think all in all, I can't remember what was the initial plan. I think initially I wanted to be finished kind of like around autumn last year. Missed that deadline. Agreed with David, with my manager, would try to have everything ready by January this year. Missed that deadline again. And I really only have everything completely ready for production, so to speak, since maybe like for 3 or 4 weeks now or something. I don't know. And as far as the release date is concerned, to be honest with you, I'm not even 100% sure at the moment. I'm not 100% sure whether the plan was to do this before sort of the Christmas break. Like usually like a release needs like maybe a bit more than 3 months pre-roll for like press and such things. So yeah, we're now in September has just started, no? So I guess probably more likely as soon as possible in January 2020, no? So maybe like second week or something like that, I guess. We'll see. Yeah, but at least, I mean, from my point of view, it's done and everything's ready now. So that is a really, really good feeling, because I have to say that was probably one of the most intense projects I've ever worked on. So that was really pushing it to the limit.
But was it interesting going back and reworking?
Very much so. Yeah. Also, sometimes in nice ways, like sometimes you rediscover certain things that you did 10 or 15 years ago, and you think about ways how you could pick up on that idea again, and maybe use like a specific technique or whatever in a different way, but also like in more like critical ways. So like one thing that I've learned from that, part of the reason why it took so long to remix the A Long Way to Fall album is because I had simply forgotten how many layers there are in these arrangements, and I didn't take anything out, but I do have to say it made me realize that I think I've taken that to a level as well where I'm not entirely convinced anymore whether it's really beneficial for the musical impact that you want to create, no? And especially when obviously not without a big time gap in between. I had listened to things like my first album under my name, Faraway Trains Passing By, which is in that sense a very simple record, for the simple fact as well, but that at that point I didn't use any computer audio recording. I was only using an Atari for MIDI sequencing, and so yeah, what I probably had like 10 or 12 synthesizers at that point, and a sampler, and that's it. So I mean, even if I would have wanted to use 40 or 50 tracks simultaneously, I simply couldn't have done it. And that's definitely something I don't want to make the same kind of music again, but what I'm quite excited about at the moment is also because I hope that my ability to sort of record one sound and sort of EQ and compress and so on in a way where it has like a maximum presence and an impact. I want to try to see whether I can significantly reduce the amount of instruments playing at the same time, but not obviously reduce the musical impact. No? And so I think that's going to be quite an interesting area to explore. I think, to be honest with you, it's partly, as so often, it's probably down to really mundane and stupid things. Like, the thing is, if you've started like I have with a very limited setup and probably maximum 12, 14 channels at the same time, and then all of a sudden you have access to computer recording, and you can theoretically have 40, 60, 70 tracks, then it can happen, and I think that's what happened to me, that you almost feel forced to max that out as well. And even if it musically is not necessary, then you kind of feel, well, I can't just leave it at a stage where the piece consists of 10 tracks or something. I mean, I could theoretically have 100 tracks, so I have to put more stuff in it, because otherwise it almost feels a bit like being lazy or something. And but that's obviously not true. No? Like there's some amazing music out there, which actually, in terms of like how many tracks are playing at the same time, is very reduced. So I mean, that's not a good criteria. No? And but again, I think it describes a little bit like how much the situation has changed. Because like in the 70s, for instance, I mean, I still don't know how they did it, not technically but creatively, how you can, if you look at Pink Floyd or something like that, no? And like the limited amount of how limited the resources were, and how they managed to not only imagine this extremely complex arrangements, but also actually execute them, and then using little tricks like, for instance, overdubbing the bass part on the drum track and stuff like that, just to save channels, whatever. And nowadays it's sort of the other way around, like technology, or more precisely the opportunities that technology offers, are so limitless that it's almost a bit dangerous, because it opens doors to many sort of like false encouragements of like thinking that you have to max something out, which is actually better left untouched. So that's probably quite a good example for that. Like more is not always more in music. No? Sometimes actually a lot less is so much more.
The saying was less is more.
Yeah.
I see the coming months look very busy and you will be greatly occupied. But what happens if you have an idea or inspiration for a new track or album that manifests in that time?
Yeah, like I said, now, I mean, we all have various kinds of mobile devices with us these days that are capable of recording, or actually even capable of producing. Like, I mean, if I really wanted to, I could probably I could just do a complete track on a laptop as well. No, I don't think I necessarily will do that, because I still quite enjoy working with hardware, and I enjoy working in my sort of like comfortable home/studio environment. But yeah, I think these days it's really easy, or it's not difficult to ensure that you don't lose things. Yeah.
Going slightly back to a previous question, is the increase in all projects nicely balanced to make you feel secure and stable, or would you want to be involved in even more?
Yeah, creatively, I'd love to be able to do a lot more stuff, but there's obviously just so much that is actually possible within 24 hours or whatever. At the same time, though, I don't feel like anything's painfully missing at the moment. Like I can do stuff in TD that is different to what I'm doing on my own, and then I have involved in a couple of other projects as well, which sort of extends the frame even a bit further. So that's all right. I mean, it's really time is like much more than wishing for more projects or more opportunities. The only thing that I really wish for would be more time to do all these things with a degree, the degree of passion and dedication that they would deserve, in my opinion. No.
So you're definitely not overstressing yourself, you don't think?
At the moment, not, but like I said before, that the situation preparing the older stuff for the box set got a bit out of hand at certain points, and I do have to admit that's unfortunately something that happens to me quite regularly. I think I'm usually not very good at correctly estimating how much time something requires, no? And I think like, something I can do that in 3 days or so, and then it's in reality it's 6 or 7, which is probably also because I never quite notice how much time passes by so quickly. When you're sitting in the studio. Then I had this situation quite recently actually, because I had to be in town for an appointment, and it was like an hour before I had to leave when I looked at the clock, and I thought like, okay, I can do one more thing, just essentially just like treating a recording of one synth that I had made, and I completely didn't realize that I spent like an hour, a bit more than an hour on like EQing it and applying other treatments, and then was nearly late for that appointment, and that happens to me quite often. Like from my perception, it's like 20 minutes, but in reality, it's 60 or 70 or something. You know?
Do you, as a rule these days, have someone who gets you out to gigs, or is there usually a flow of people now asking you to attend events, or do you go asking yourself?
I actually don't really go out that much anymore. But it's always been a bit like that. I always go like through phases. Like sometimes I have like 3 years or whatever where I'm going to gigs or whatever quite frequently, and then I have 3 years where I stay at home a lot. I think one thing is also I do have to admit that my favorite listening environment, and not talking about my own music, but other people's music, probably even more so, is not necessarily a gig. Like I really like sitting at home and listening to music there. So, because like with gigs, it's always like that risk as well. Like sometimes you're lucky and you are in a place where there's like a really nice sound and people are quite attentive, but then you go to a gig that you were really looking forward to, and it's a really crappy sound system or whatever. No? So it's kind of and at home I sort of know that I know what my stereo sounds like. I sort of can understand the music how I would like to understand it or perceive it. So but at the moment I'm not really going out that much, but who knows, that may change again.
I was out yesterday making another music video. Have you considered making a music video with a storyline? Do you ever feel the urge to do something wacky?
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, when I started trying to do music professionally, that was still at a time where it wouldn't have been too unrealistic to think that even with something like an electronica project, you could get to a point where it's a lot about music videos as well. Unfortunately, obviously now times have changed, no? And like even like mainstream production budgets for music videos have gone down very much, and I think for like the average electronica release, it's probably far from like a mandatory requirement to have a music video. Also because music television has obviously mostly vanished, no? And I think I always hear like mixed things. Like some people think that YouTube is like it's a good opportunity, a good avenue to explore in terms of like promoting stuff. Other people think it's just wasted energy, no? So, but generally I think there's just not that infrastructure anymore. So I didn't even have that many videos. Probably it's like 3 or 4 altogether. Like for the last album, I was quite lucky because I had met this Irish director, and he offered to do a video for one song, and that actually was a video with an actual storyline as well. It was more like a short movie, not even with quite how do you say, like naturalist imagery, like nothing abstract, but
did you feature in it?
No. It's like actors.
But do you have a budding actor side to you? I mean, do you think there's a part of you that could actually see yourself doing it? I don't know, walking through a woodland or across the countryside and being filmed, and just doing anyway, just to see if it's something that would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, it's not necessarily something I'd be super uncomfortable about, but at the same time, no, that's what I mean. I think nowadays it would probably have to be sort of like embedded in something that is a bit more than that, because like unlike like 20-25 years ago, I think nowadays it's not enough anymore to sort of to film the artist in some kind of more or less random environment, maybe like something that just replicates cliches about the respective genre. So I mean, if I was a rapper, then I probably would be standing in front of a wall with graffiti on it or something, and like the say like the sentimental indie rocker is walking through the fields and gazing into the far away or whatever. Like these kind of things, I think probably don't work anymore to that degree. And I do have to admit, I don't think I'm very good in that field, like inventing stuff myself. Like I never had a particularly good imagination, I think, for visual stuff. So I would definitely rely again on someone who is actually good in that field, and who has a striking idea.
So Nat is a natural person for using for your creative imagery, if that makes sense. I mean, does she pick up on your wavelength sometimes with the music?
Sure, yeah. I mean, obviously, like there again in a quite a different way, because all of Nat's imagery is quite abstract. I mean, not really, because it's all based on stuff that actually does exist in reality and that she has filmed, but the way how she treats the material and collages it is obviously not like following like a conventional storyline or something like that, and I think that suits this kind of music quite well, because I think it leaves enough room for the listener or then viewer as well, for their imagination, and that I think people often say that electronic music, not just mine, any electronic music, they enjoy because it's a bit like a soundtrack to a film that you have in your head, no? And that's why I wanted to work with imagery that is not, especially at gigs, that is not like limiting that too much, no?
I get it. It means you're allowing the people to think,
exactly,
opposed to spoon feeding.
Yeah, because I think it would be a shame if you would ruin that, because I think that is really one of the most appealing things about electronic music.
Is there also any news relating to the new Tangerine Dream studio album?
I think there's nothing that I can announce like officially at this point. What I can say though, and not because of not for confidentiality reasons, but simply because at least to my knowledge that there is actually nothing superficial to announce at the moment. But as far as the creative process is concerned, we have like a number of ideas and concepts, and we all have like our little sketchbooks as well, just like you have, our partitions on the hard drive, which is reserved for TD related ideas. And I think what we have to do next is essentially logistics, because what we wanted to do, I think Quantum Gate benefited greatly from Thorsten and me actually working together and not just exchanging files over the internet or something. And that's definitely a scenario that we want to have again, and preferably this time with Hoshiko being continuously on board as well. So we've started looking into options as well for like reasonably priced spaces, countryside where we could go for a couple of weeks or something and record stuff. So it's what else can I say? Maybe one thing that I think we want to try is to, that way, because we are then all going to be present again in the same space, to have an element of what is present in those session things as well, but at the same time only to take that as a starting point, no? And then to see what can be achieved if those things are then further developed, because obviously there's a difference between like an improvisation, and it has certain limitations as well. We usually don't agree on much more when we play one of these sessions than like the tempo and the key. But still, though, I mean that is a bit limiting as well, no? Because like on an actual album, I wouldn't necessarily say like it should be 50 minutes in C minor or something. No? That it should be more varied. And so like I think if we would start brainstorming first a bit and record lots of ideas, and then before it gets too much and you sort of lose track, then say stop, and now we're going to dissect what we've done there and see, pick out bits that are worth developing further. And that's kind of the idea that we had.
And do you think you do just as well as Quantum Gate? I mean, do you think there's a bigger expectation from fans now, perhaps? Have you grown fans? What do you think, looking at statistics?
I think that the expectation on the basis of Quantum Gate would probably not even be my biggest worry. I think one challenge will simply be as well that the situation at which Quantum Gate was released and finished was obviously a very particular one, due to Edgar's passing. And I think I would imagine, I'm not sure, I haven't spoken to any journalists about that, but I would imagine that probably a lot of people may have been kind to that record because of that backdrop as well, no? And obviously with a new album, that's not something that we can bank on, that we're going to be treated only touched with gloves and wrapped in cushions and whatever. I mean that's going to be a reality check situation. So I mean I wouldn't be surprised if the reaction will by far not be as across the board positive as it was with that last record. But again, I mean that's probably one of the advantages if you do something like this for a bit of a longer time, because I've been there before on my own as well. Like I've had a couple of years where even like the hipster press was presenting me like my stuff was the hottest shit, and then there was a time when everyone was writing me down, and then there was a time where the climate sort of shifted towards like a more favorable atmosphere again, and then there was a time when all of a sudden some people started saying I was like a legend or something like that, which I found pretty bizarre. So it always goes through these, always goes up and down, and of course it's gonna go down again as well. But yeah, I mean at this point I'm not really scared of that anymore. I would always say, like as long as I can sort of make a living from doing this, that's so much more than what you can realistically expect in our times. So that's all fine, really.
Well, I think that's the way you have to work. I do think it's the way you have to work.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think there'll ever be another Tangerine Dream studio album with a part 1 and a part 2? Like 2 25-minute, like not sessions as such, but structured, pieces again?
I mean, I love those types of things, and I mean we've actually been. I mean that's like one of the things that we were discussing at the moment, and I can't say that that's the way it's going to be in the end, because it very much depends on how the actual material turns out and whether it lends itself to that approach. But we've been discussing whether we could try to do something that works like as a continuous listening experience, no? And I mean, that's really just my personal preference at the moment. I would personally prefer something a bit more like structurally, like how, let's say, something like force majeure is done, rather than something that is really one piece over 25 minutes. I think for me the magic of something like force majeure is that it is one piece, but like sort of made up out of loads of connected little pieces. No, that's something that I find a very interesting challenge. It's actually something that I've tried myself for many years as well, always unsuccessfully, because I always that's for instance, that's one of these things that I really hope one day I'm gonna manage to do something where you could say where the sum of the parts is bigger than just where the result is bigger than just the sum of the parts. No? And my problem was always, I started, I think, at least 2 albums with this idea of like keeping all the pieces to like 2-3 minutes and then connecting them and writing like segues and stuff. But then in the end, these 3-minute pieces sort of extended to 7 minutes, and then I thought, that's not going to work. Like they have to be individual ones, and so I think that would be wonderful if we'd managed to do that. But yeah, it depends a bit on what we come up with in that brainstorming.
I mean, I only really come out with that question after you answering probably the initial question.
Yeah.
Just coming through my head, thinking I haven't heard a Tangerine Dream album like that for a long time now. And I'm talking just from my personal experience too. I'm not talking from anyone who's asked me. But
I think that would be great. But it's a real that's not an easy thing to achieve. So I mean that's why I find that very interesting and very challenging as well. I really hope that either with TD or in some other form, I'm going to manage to be involved in a project like that at some point. That would be great. Yeah.
It's been great catching up again, Ulrich. Always a pleasure to meet you. I can't say thank you enough for attending the Hope and Anchor gig, and thank you for your interview today. Good luck in all your upcoming adventures.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I really enjoyed that Hope and Anchor gig. I think that was great. And thanks. So I have to return the thank you and say thanks for inviting me, and thanks for recording it. It's something I would have completely forgotten about if you wouldn't have brought it up yourself, which was very good actually.
Well, people at some point will get the opportunity to hear that.
Yeah.
Let's see what they make of it.
Yeah, that was a fun evening. Yeah.